Hi everyone, welcome back to Coachy TV. In this video, we're going to look at a workout that helps link two parts of your training year, your general preparation phase, helping it link it to specific prep workouts that you do at the very end of general prep, and the beginning of specific prep to kind of link the two together as you shift your focus in what you're doing each year. General prep, you're really looking at mostly aerobic development in the summer if we're going to a cross-country season, or your winter training if you're going into a track season. You do some alactic work too, but now you're going to start to increase a little bit of a need to start pushing on the energy system that you haven't really done a lot, the anaerobic glycolytic system. And this is a workout that really helps with doing that. Doesn't matter, again, if you're going into, most of the world is getting into, prepping for their cross-country season, but this is a workout that I also do to transition between my general prep and specific prep in track as well, because it's important to tag these in the right area, and that is medium hill intervals. You would only do these after you've done a few cycles of short hill intervals. I have that in video on that in the description down below, talking about the importance of those. What we're looking at here specifically, though, why we would go from going short to medium, is this is a transition workout. Linking these two, it helps to do that, and then we'll actually find out that later on in the year we'll do something called long hill intervals. So not only are you linking phases with these hills, you're also sort of together building up on them. So what we're going to be looking at here is how does this workout help transition between these phases, and what new adaptations does it create? As I said, you're going to start to push on that energy system that we haven't done a lot to yet, but in a way that doesn't start a timetable too early so that they peak earlier than we want them to. So this is where we do it in our area, and this is an overpass over one of the interstates in Tampa, Florida, that we do this in, and that's kind of what you want to think of. It's not super steep, but that's the kind of steepness that you want. 2 to 3%. That's basically what an on-ramp, off-ramp, overpass typically is anywhere. So that's kind of what you're looking for. We just happen to have one that has a really nice sidewalk with a divider, so that it's super safe, and obviously it being a paved surface means that it's a very uniform surface. Where we do our short hill intervals, and if that park's ever closed down, we can do it here too, but I like to do the short hill intervals at a park, and you'll see that in the video if you click on that one in the description down below. But this one, it works out a lot nicer to do it here on this road. And jokingly put on here, this is one of our recent graduates that he was just stalling on this day. This is a much more challenging workout than the short hill intervals, simply because of the extent of it. We're going from short to medium, but if you've done those cycles of short hill intervals beforehand, you should be fine able to do this. It's gonna tag them the first time, but it tagged them hard the first time they did the short hill intervals too, and it'll help get them ready for some of these more specific type work that you'll be doing here in specific prep. Don't think that you should skip through short hill intervals. Those have their important place that help get you ready for medium hills, and medium hills help you transition between phases. So there's all sort of a purpose to this. Even the young man in the picture here, who's been in our program for 4 years and is an advanced runner, I wouldn't skip short hills, just be like, oh, this is an advanced kid, let's just do mediums and that kind of thing. Kind of that whole idea of everything in its proper place. So don't skip on doing this process after you've done the short hill intervals. So let's go ahead and get right into it. I'm Kyle Giacono, the head boys cross country and track coach at Wharton High School in Tampa, Florida. I have been for the last 7 years. If you'd like a closer look at my credentials, some of them are on the screen. Okay, so we always look at the race metrics. We're getting ready for the 5K here. Again, if you were getting ready for the 3,200, 1,600 meter, 800 meter, you would still want to do these in the track season, but let's focus on cross country, because that's what most of the world is getting ready for here on June 19th as I am recording this. So, study produced by Ingham in 2008, they found that the person who won 5K races 94.3% of the time had the most developed VO2 max system, where they could use the most oxygen while working, so they could race faster aerobically. Makes perfect sense because of the extent of this race. From the USATF distance curriculum, we will find that the 5K is run very close to VO2 max, just a little bit slower, 97% of VO2 max pace. VO2 max pace is typically associated with your 2-mile pace, 5K 3.1 miles, 5 kilometers. So that's why that's so close, and why there's that very close association with winning in the 5K with VO2 max. So it all makes perfect sense. And the race energy supply, a study that was released by Dr. Matter and Dr. Hartman in 2018, they found that 4% of the energy came from the ATP phosphocreatine system, collectively called the alactic system, and 86% of the energy comes from the aerobic system. Makes perfect sense with the extent of it. But there's that 10% there, the anaerobic glycolytic system. The ATP, creatine phosphate system, alactic system, and the aerobic system is what we've been really working on in the general preparation phase, the first half of your training year when you're getting ready for either a cross country or a track season. I'll put all the videos in the description down below that we looked through general prep. But that's all well and good. That gets you to 90%. But we also have to look at this 10%, the anaerobic glycolytic system, and that's what's really going to be starting to be looked at here as we try and link general prep to specific prep. We don't really want to do true anaerobic glycolytic work like you would by going out and doing, intensive tempos, special endurance 1, special endurance 2, like you will, when you get to the heart of specific prep. But what we want to do here with this type of workout, and what it allows you to do, it kind of starts to nudge this energy system just a little bit, but in a way that it's not going to accumulate acid and start the timetable peaking on that system, so that we can still have our aerobic system and our anaerobic system peaking at the same time. Video in the description down below on specific prep that kind of tells that story a little bit more in depth. But that's kind of the idea here, is these hills, the short hill intervals tag the ATP creatine phosphate system. If you do them correctly with active recovery and a long cool down, it also gets the aerobic system a good long cool down. What we're doing here is we're just kind of nudging this energy system just a little bit as we're doing these other ones, but not in a way that's going to damage us in the long term. So the law of training specificity, every training session that you do or decide not to do, that you leave out or whatever, it's going to have a very specific effect on the athlete. You do this workout, this is going to be happening to the athlete. You don't do that workout, you're not going to get that effect. Same thing in the reverse order. And we have to understand that just because it has that effect and just because we're doing something, it may or may not be desired. So we always have to think about the specific demands of the race before we start coming up with these workouts. So we need to really kind of ask ourselves, how do medium hills specifically support performance in the cross-country 5K? And if it didn't, then we shouldn't do it. That we shouldn't do a workout just to do it. So we have to keep that in mind. How do we get all of these things? How does this help us with the aerobic system, the alactic system, and starting to look at the anaerobic glycolytic system in a way that they can all peak at the same time? How does it help this very accurate win percentage of VO2 max, with the understanding of where that intensity is actually raced at in the 5K? That's what we really have to kind of consider as we look at this. So if we look at our 5 phases of a macro cycle, I said that specific prep is the second part that includes workouts. You always want to have that transitionary period between your seasons, between cross country and track and vice versa, where you have your rest and recovery. That's the transition phase. General preparation phase, which is where these are going to start to appear at the end. We're preparing for more intense work, and specific prep is where we're specifically preparing for the demands of the race. That's the idea of we've got 10% of the energy coming from the anaerobic glycolytic system. We have to kind of start working this in. Where do the medium hills kind of lie? Right in there. Tail end of general prep into the beginning of specific prep. It'll allow you to do these specific prep workouts more effectively when you get to them, and it also links this to what, as I mentioned before, are long hill intervals. That would be sort of that same thing if you just move this arrow down a little bit, and if we said, the end of specific prep into the beginning of pre-comp, that's where the long hills are. And all of these things are building on each other, so it's preparing for the specific demands. Pre-comp are preparing for the most important meets. These are the hardest workouts of the season in pre-comp, so we're leading to this point. And then the competitive phase, these are big-time races. It's where the races dictate everything. So that's where this all kind of fits into place, and why this makes sense as like a linking workout, because it's still part of preparing us for more intense work, the actual work that we're doing in specific prep, and then also kind of nudging it along the way as we start specific prep. So the energy continuum, we always look at this. It's from the USA track and field curriculum. From that slide, from a couple slides ago, everything is based on VO2 max, so 100% of it. We'll see that the 5K, as we said, is run at 97% of that. Obviously, the 1500 meter is going to be run a little bit faster, between 110 and 112% of VO2 max. If we look at the 10K, it's going to be slower, 92%. It makes perfect sense. So if we look at what we were doing earlier in the training year, in general prep, the workouts target VO2 max and slower. So we're talking about, in general prep, we were doing those VO2 max or aerobic power intervals and slower, right? You might have a kid that was doing some critical velocity work. We talked about how that might be okay for some people, but you definitely were doing tempo runs, and you definitely were doing aerobic threshold runs, 65 to 70% with your long and recovery runs. That's pretty much a lot of what you were doing in general prep, and you were also doing anaerobic alactic, which is all the way out here to the left. So basically, general prep is all the way out here to the left. Your fly 30s and alactic workout, as well as your short hill intervals, we're tagging that. and then VO2 max to the right. So that's basically what you're looking at. This whole area from VO2 max to about right here, all that in between, we have really ignored in general prep, okay? This is due to the fact that the adaptations from the aerobic system take 20 plus weeks to maximize. So everything from VO2 max to the right, it takes 20 plus weeks, so we need to start them earlier. And then we also said in some previous videos that the anaerobic alactic system almost never peaks out. It's sort of one of those things that you always keep training no matter what you do. It doesn't have a peaking timetable, so it's undefined. So that's why you can start doing that a little bit earlier. If we talk about specific prep workouts, okay, we keep targeting those same areas, right? Because these take 20 plus weeks, we have to keep hitting them, you know, maybe at a slightly different rate, maybe a slightly less rate than you had because you were focusing on them, and we're still focusing on them in this, while we're starting to target the remaining areas. So specific prep is where now we start to include the VO2 max, linking that area to anaerobic alactic. So these are your anaerobic glycolytic type workouts, your extensive tempo that goes faster than aerobic power. You've got your intensive tempo, special endurance 1, special endurance 2. I talked about in a previous video that I do not like speed endurance. I just think it doesn't really help somebody doing, say, the 5K down to, say, a 1,600 meter, your distance type kids in high school. There's reason why you would want your 800 meter kids, your 800, 1,600 meter kids in that order to do that, but we're not dealing with that right now. We're dealing with a cross-country 5K, so that really is still kind of being ignored. But for the most part, what specific prep does is it takes that, you know, middle left part, if you're looking at the screen, most of that area that's called combined zone here, where you're increasing the demand from the anaerobic system, and we begin to start targeting it. So in pre-comp, we can just nail this energy system with some of these really fast, intense workouts so that they can really be hitting on all cylinders at the state meet or whatever your most important workout is. The reason for this, why we do that, and we talk about this in the specific prep video in detail, is the anaerobic glycolytic adaptations. They take 9 to 11 weeks. So the idea being, if this takes 20 plus weeks, this takes about half that amount of time. You do this at the beginning, the first half of the year in general prep. Specific prep, you start to do this, and the short hills help to blend this together. So you're not going from 0 to 100. That way you're not going from no anaerobic glycolytic workouts right into intensive tempo or right into special 1 or special 2. The short hill, the medium hill intervals are a stepping stone in between that so that they can make best use of those intensive tempo and other type workouts that are anaerobic glycolytic related. And also it helps to, you know, make sure there's not injuries and that kind of thing. It just prepares the body for it. Again, transitionary workout. You're not going to do these for a ton of time, but they have that place to help you transition and link these things all together. So obviously hills are not actually on this, but that's kind of the idea here, is you can't actually say what is the pace of these short hill intervals. You've seen in a lot of videos, I can show you how you can calculate it from your VO2 max, what your aerobic threshold, lactic threshold, VO2 max should be. You really can't do that with short hill I said that again. Same thing with short hill intervals, but medium hill intervals, the same thing. You can't give a target pace. I'll show you and I'll give you some cues that you would want to say either for yourself or for your training, but there's too much going on there. First off, your hill might be a little bit different than the hill I'm working on. I say 2 to 3%. You might have kids that, you know, just can't go as intense yet, or maybe are more intense than the ones that I'm used to. So just keep in mind what this is targeting, but you can't do it based on a pace. So just kind of get that out of your mind. This is one of those things that has to be a little bit on feel, which is perfectly fine because cross country is a lot about pace and feel and that kind of thing. Okay, so I want to talk briefly about the 5 motor performance abilities. Basically, there are 5 things that make up athletes. The idea being is 5 actual qualities that make up anything you do in athletics. The first one is endurance, and that's defined as the ability to work at a given intensity over a period of time. Uses the aerobic and the 2 anaerobic energy systems, because you can talk about creating endurance in these energy systems as well as the aerobic, which is generally the ability to do work over a period of time. It's generally associated with the aerobic system, but the other ones come into play. Flexibility is the ability to move joints effectively. Coordination permits synchronization of 2 or more body parts. How can you link movements together? An outcome of how the brain directs those body parts move. So there's also, it's the starting with the central nervous system, helping the body parts work together, and then the body parts actually working together in an effective way. So it's kind of a 2-step process with coordination. Speed, not too surprising, capacity to move the body at a very quickly. Basically, it's using the 2 anaerobic energy systems, the alactic and the glycolytic. Then we've got strength, force produced regardless of speed of movement without time constraints. The idea being with training either yourself or somebody else is figuring out what of these 5 are the most important and how do we kind of try and build these 5 for performance in whatever it is you're getting them ready for. If we were to kind of think about this with the cross-country 5K, the endurance factor is probably the most important thing. You would probably put this at, at the very least a 9, probably a 10 out of 10 if you were doing it. Something like speed is going to be a little bit less so, but maybe not, it's not unimportant. So maybe it's like a 5 or a 6 or something like that. Strength, same kind of thing, and probably strength in cross country is a little bit higher than, say, the 2-mile in track. So maybe that's also like a 5 or a 6, maybe a 6. Coordination and flexibility, well, you definitely need to be coordinated so you can't fall down there. So maybe hypothetically it's, a 4 or a 5. And flexibility, probably the least important of all these, but not unimportant. So maybe it's like a 2 or a 3 or something like that. If you were dealing with somebody who was getting ready for throwing the javelin or the shot in the disc, endurance would probably be the least important of those because everything they do is probably, 3 to 4 seconds? Speed, strength, coordination probably are much more important for those events. If you start looking at maybe something like the high jump, maybe flexibility starts to increase so you can do, the arching of the back and the coordination is up there, speed and strength. Again, endurance is probably low. So you have to just basically look at how can we, target the 5 motor performance abilities in everything we're doing. And the reason why I'm really bringing this up is hill intervals, regardless of this, it starts with short, goes to medium, and becomes long, are one of the workouts that we can really target all 5 of these areas in a very specific way. And I'll show you how to do that as we look at the training design here in 1 second. Okay, so let's look at these designed adaptations of these medium hill intervals. We have to keep in mind the law of specificity we talked about with cross-country, and we have to think about, are these adaptations going to be beneficial for the cross-country 5K? As we look at also, as I mentioned in the last slide, how the motor performance abilities are going to be targeted in these adaptations also. So strength development, okay? This is an important thing that you're going to be getting with hills. If you add the incline, you're going to have this idea of you have to push off even more so against gravity because you're now going uphill, you're moving more of your weight uphill. So strength is definitely a big part of any type of hill interval. So you're going to have these increased force production, okay? You're going to have a high heart rate. I talk about halfway through checking to make sure that whoever you're doing, their heart rate is over 180. And what you can do that is you just, if you count for 10 seconds, that's over 30 if you find your heartbeat at your neck or whatever. You can use those heart rate monitors that are on a lot of GPS watches. They're kind of notoriously inaccurate. They kind of help you a little bit. I would say just, for 10 seconds, check it with that 30 if it's over 30. You're also going to have muscle elasticity. This is plyometric type work whenever you're running uphill. So this is going to help with muscle, elastic strength, the kind of strength that you really want for running. Absolute strength really isn't all that important for any athletic competition except for like weightlifting and that kind of thing. So this is the kind of the idea of you have muscle strength that's going to give you free energy with this elastic nature of the stretch shortening cycle, and it's the kind of strength that you really need to get up hills and that kind of thing. So that's an important part of the strength development. Contractile power goes right with force production, being able to contract your muscles in a powerful way. And as I mentioned, there's a really important component of your central nervous system, your brain through through your spine. The ability to fire those nerves, the neurotransmitters quickly, and having those pathways much more developed from doing this over and over again, that develops the neural pathways. That's an element of strength too. It's why a lot of times you'll see people that might not look especially strong, but they can really explode in a very powerful way. That's obviously hypertrophy or muscle mass is a type of strength, but it's not really the type of strength we want with a distance runner to carry a lot of extra strength or extra weight on them. This is kind of that idea of strength development that is really specific to especially the cross country. So that muscle elasticity, plyometric work, and this type of central nervous system pathway improvements are really important. So strength is definitely being developed. It's fake speed development, and that's obviously not a technical term, but the idea being is if you do want to target the alactic energy system, the ATP and the phosphocreatine, my recommendation is things like Fly 30s. I have a video in the description down below that talks about alactic training. that's really doing it. Speed, truly what a speed workout is. If you're a distance coach and you go out and you talk to a sprint coach, they're going to say, what is speed? They're going to say 30 to 60 meters. That is speed. A lot of times you'll have a distance coach that'll think, 400s or speed or whatever. Truly speed development, the fastest type of speed is the creatine phosphate system, which lasts about 6 seconds. And if you do these where you're giving the amount of time for the phosphocreatine system, the alactic system to reset, even though you're not going as fast as you possibly can, you're not truly training speed. You're training the system that will eventually allow you to do speed, or you have been doing speed throughout general prep with Fly 30. So it is training that energy system, although not in the way, you're not really training them to go super fast. You can't go fast if you're going up a hill, but you're training the energy system in a way to deliver energy so that when you go back to a flat surface like your track, when you're doing truly speed work, it's a little bit more effective at doing what it does. So the beginning of each rep of these medium hills is that energy system, the alactic system, 6 to 7 seconds. And this is the important thing. This is really the difference between, because if you've seen our video on short hill intervals, this is really no different. This is the important thing that is different with medium hills. The anaerobic glycolytic system, lasts 90 to 120 seconds, You're fake training this in a way that we're starting to get the body to be more used to adding energy here, with one important caveat. These take about 60 to 90 seconds. By these, I mean the medium hill intervals take 60 to 90 seconds. So that's right in the wheelhouse of where it's going to be tagging this, Adding an increased demand on this energy system because these are longer. From our short hill intervals video, you'll know that I'll say those should be about, maybe 25 to maybe 45 seconds. These are about, almost up to twice as long as those. So because of the length of it, that's the only difference. The steepness is still the same, 2 to 3%. It adds that demand on this energy system, the anaerobic glycolytic system, to prepare for more intense work. That's really the difference here. This is the adaptation that we are trying to get here that we did not want from short hill intervals because it was too early. We did not want to start priming this energy system because we're not going to be taxing it, from when you start doing this until about 3 to 4 weeks down the road from when you first start doing medium hill intervals. That's really all that we're adding to the picture here, is adding this increased demand on the anaerobic glycolytic system. But, and you're probably thinking from that last slide, wait, 9 to 11 weeks to peak. If we start doing this in general prep, we're going to peak before the state meet, right? That's an important thing to think about. Absolutely, that's thinking about law of training specificity. But here's the difference. While these systems are being touched, the hill reduces the intensity. As I said, you're not training speed. You're training this energy system, but you're not training speed because of the hill. Same thing here. You're not training the body's ability to deal with acid accumulation, which comes with this type of training, biochemical change that comes with acid, because the hill takes the intensity out of this, so you're not going to be accumulating acid. You're going to be producing more acid. It's going to be close to being over lactic threshold, or where lactic acid accumulates, but because of the hill, you're not going to get to that point where your body's going to start storing, sodium bicarbonate to neutralize acid. That's the timetable that starts at a 9 to 11 week window that we're talking about. The hill is what prevents it. That's the important thing. If you were to go to a track and run for, say, 60 seconds as fast as you could, probably 350 to maybe 400 and something meters, depending on how in shape you are, that would produce a ton of acid, and your body would be eventually limited because of the acid accumulation. The hill prevents the acid from accumulating, as well as the rest period in between. It stimulates parts of speed, as we just said, alactic and the glycolytic work, but hill keeps things in check. That's why this is a transitionary workout. It allows you to get your body just used to kind of tapping into this energy system a little bit more so than it was with just the short hill intervals, but the hill is what protects us here. A lot of people might think that you would be producing more acid because you've got the hill involved. Nope. The hill is what actually allows you to stay on point. Not to do story time here, but we have a fantastic sprint coach at our school named Heenan Tate. And he was one time we were just kind of talking about hills and where you can put them in a training cycle. And he used to say that they would do hill intervals, short hill, because he was of a short hurdler, and he would go all the way out to the 400s. They would do that the day before a meet because there's no acid accumulation. I wouldn't necessarily do that with a distance kid, but you technically could because there's no acid accumulation. So this is really a a 24-hour recovery, and we'll get to that a little bit later on, but I just thought that was kind of interesting to kind of think about. We think about hills being so taxing. It's the hill that keeps the intensity in check for you. Okay, so as I mentioned already, no acid accumulation if done correctly because of the hill. So we've got strength and fake speed, if you want to think of it that way, from the motor performance abilities. We've got running mechanics, which touch on coordination, right? You've got this hill. It makes things a little bit more challenging. It makes your body have to work on what's called ground penetrating mechanics, okay? Hitting the ground, prepared to hit the ground with the hill. You have to think about it a little bit more at the beginning, but your body gets better at it. So you do this instinctively after you've done it a few times, and especially after you've done it for a few years. The hill also helps correct knee lift. You don't want to do something like, I kind of cringe a little bit when I see things like stadium stairs, because I see, that's going to make your kids, have a little bit more strength, but it also changes running mechanics in a way that's not, effective to translating back to, running on somewhat flat ground, especially in a track season, and even cross country, at least here in Florida. A lot of our races are for the most part flat, and there's still a lot of flat running even in any place in the country, I'm assuming here. If you put 2 to 3% incline, it doesn't change your running mechanics. It just helps you get your knees up just a little bit in a correct fashion, so that's an important thing with coordination. Effective and efficient arm carriage. Usually if you see somebody that carries their arms too high and you tell them, hey, get your arms down, and it drops down for like 3 strides, then it comes right back up, it's really the knee lift that becomes the problem. You'll probably notice if you look closely at people that carry their arms too high, they probably chop their steps. They probably have really short steps, and doing things like this make them more coordinated with their knee lift, and it's going to help with their arm carriage too when it's done on the correct incline, as I said. If you do this where they're trying to get up a 10% incline or something crazy, then it's not going to translate back to it. So if you have somebody that has that, obviously you can cue them to relax their upper body, but really what they need is things like this. Fly 30s help this, but short hill, medium hill, and eventually long hill intervals also help with this, because they've got to get their knees up, and if your knees are coming up, your arms are going to kind of come down also in a more effective way. So we've got coordination being tagged here. So strength and speed are directly motor performance abilities that we talked about, right? And running mechanics and ground preparation, as I said, have to do with coordination. Boom, we've got 3 motor performance abilities right there. Hills are some of the few core workouts that can train 3 of these. If you go out and do a long run, you're just training endurance, which is fine. Obviously, that's the most important one, as we talked about before. If you're doing, fly 30s, you can do them in a way that does, endurance, but you're pretty much training more speed on those days. That's kind of what the idea here. This is a workout that can really get 3 abilities at the same time. And if you do these correctly, you can improve endurance on these, okay? The idea being is you do the rep and you have active recovery jogging between. Your heart rate isn't going to drop low enough to where it's out of aerobic threshold or easy pace. So if you do all of them, say, you do 4 to maybe 6 or 7 of these, depending on how advanced your group is, that's a continuous run of probably 25 minutes. And then if you jump right into a cool down right afterwards, you've got endurance being tagged here too. Boom, we've got 4 motor performance abilities being targeted in one super effective, super specific workout that helps with the 5K, as we're targeting all 5 of these in a very systematic way. Add a good stretching routine as part of your cool down, you've added flexibility. Getting all 5 motor performance abilities covered in one day. There's very few workouts that you can do to cover all 5 motor performance abilities in one day. Medium hill does all that in a targeted way that's not overdoing or underdoing any of it for specific adaptations for the cross-country 5K. And as we talked about before, this is the idea of the specific nature of adding this to everything else we talked about with short hill intervals, specific to the 5K, not only in adding this energy demand importance as we get later in the year, as we link these two demands. We talk about taking the danger of having acid accumulation out because of the hill, and we've got all 5 motor performance abilities. This is just a really quality workout that you want to make sure that you get in an effective way that makes sense for your situation. Okay, so let's look at the training design. That's great to know all the science behind it, but how do we actually go out and effectively do it? So you want to have one of these per microcycle in the end of general prep and the beginning of specific prep, okay? I would say about 3 to 5 that you want to get in during a macrocycle. Again, this is a transitionary workout. You don't want to do these for 2 months, okay? Maybe if you have a younger kid, and really medium hill intervals might become more their long hill intervals just because of the extent, but you really want to use this again. It's a bridge, okay? a bridge links two things together that you're on for longer, right? That's what you want to kind of think with this, a transition between these two. So 3 to 5, I'm going to show you on the fictitious macrocycle here that we're looking at that I'm going to get 3 here because there's kind of other things that you want to get to. So you definitely can overdo these if you get into it. But if you kind of think about this again as a bridge, okay, it's an accent to it. It helps you get from one place to the other. It's not the core part. You'll probably be doing just fine. Again, 3 to 5 of these in your actual macrocycle. I'm on the throw also in the description down below a video where we actually did medium hills one time during our track season last year. It doesn't matter that it was track season. Again, this would be the same basic training design. It'll be in the description down below if you want to take a look at it too. Okay, so the medium hill intervals. Intervals meaning incomplete recovery, okay? Repetitions are full recovery. Repetitions are like races. A VO2 max test, a 2-mile test, or say a 5K, those are repetitions, 1 with full recovery on the back end. And then at the end of the season, you're also doing repetitions when you're doing, your competitive type phase, the end of pre-comp, that kind of thing. That's where you start doing more work. So it's incomplete recovery. It's also described as a worthwhile break. So like say for VO2 max where you give, maybe you're doing mile intervals at 5 minutes, you give 5 minutes off in between. It's not full recovery in that case, and we'll see what incomplete recovery means here for medium hills, but that's the idea. You're not going to be fully recovered between them, but you should be able to replicate. Doing it as an interval as opposed to just let's just go up a hill for as long as we can until we stop. This interval, in between allows for a larger amount of work of this high intensity type work. So what you want to do, first, most importantly, find a safe hill. As you saw from the picture at the very beginning, it's a very safe hill that we have because we've got that it's 2 to 3% because it's that overpass, but we have the concrete dividers and things like that. It's very, very, it's a paved surface, so we don't have to really worry about holes or anything. In the short hill intervals video that's in the description down below, I say, make sure you walk the course. We'll do things like put cones or, put a shirt or something like that if there is a hole to make sure the kids don't step in it. First off, make sure you find a safe hill. Then find one that's, 2 to 3% that's also safe. So the safe part is obviously the first thing. You want it to be about 350 to 400 meters. The hill that I showed you is about 360 to 370 meters as you're doing it, about 0.22, 0.23 of a mile as you're doing it. That's what works for us. It's the best one that we have. It works out perfectly for us. You could go out to 400 meters. I wouldn't go much further than that. If you have a hill that's longer, great. Just find a stopping point and say, this is the stopping point, everybody. We're going to that point. The hill that we have just happens to be perfect where they can have an actual stopping point. Each rep should be fast, but should be replicated for 60 to 90 seconds. So if you have a kid that goes out on the first one and they run for 60, that second one shouldn't be 75 and then 76 and they just can't do it. It should be replicatable. Now, here's one of the things that change with the short hills. Short hills, you pretty much can go almost as fast as you can. The hill's going to keep it somewhat in check and not have a huge amount of fluctuation because it's only, 120 to, say, 200 meters. The one that we do is about 180 to 190 meters. I would, the first time you do this, especially the first time in the training year and especially the first time you're doing it, it needs to be a little bit slower than the short hill intervals. The beginning is still going to be fast. You've got the alactic system, but they're going to need to settle in a little bit more so. So if you tell them, excuse me, if you tell them on short hill intervals, go 99%, tell them on this one go 98.3%. They're not going to know what that means, but they're going to go a little bit slower, be a little bit more reserved so that they can replicate it all the way through. I would say the first time, start with about 4 to 5, build to about 6 to 7. That kind of usually makes for a good amount for each one of these reps. That really is the danger point, going out a little bit too fast. And trying doing a few too many reps. If you wanted to go out and you're like, all right, we're going to go 4 to 5, and you see something like, maybe they could do one more, and then that last rep is just garbage. This is still, a general prep. Into specific prep, one of the things that I always tell my group in general prep, it's kind of like a Price is Right type of mentality. If you're, $5 under, you're still in the game. You go $1 over, you're busted. You're out of the game. I'd rather you do 95% at this point of the year, and even though this is getting into specific prep where you want to be a little bit more focused and tailored, I'd rather you be 95%, or since this transition, say 97% than 101% or something like that. And that's just kind of the danger point, and that comes with doing this more time. You're probably going to have a couple kids, or even yourself the first time you do it, that want to go, and they're going to blow up on it. But the more times you do this and the more seasoned they get and they kind of understand what that means, they can kind of pace themselves a little bit more, which is important, pacing yourself for a cross-country 5K anyway. So the rest on these is pretty extensive. It's not full recovery, but it's pretty extensive, especially for, distance runners who kind of want to get in and get it done. And that's the second danger point here. You don't want to shortchange the rest here. Don't worry about losing the aerobic development. If you've done these reps fairly intense, fairly fast, as I mentioned before, your heart rate's not going to drop below 120 for any significant period of time. You're still going to get that central VO2 max development going on. So 5 to 6 minutes of a jog. So don't just sit there. You got to move. It helps. Part of the reason why this works is that you're being active. So it takes 3 minutes for 80% of the alactic system, the phosphocreatine, to reform. So that's where you get to the 3 minutes, and the rest, the extra 2 minutes or so, 2 to 3 minutes that you have here. And on these, actually, I usually like to kind of go out to the end of it, as long as their heart rate isn't dropping and they're not just literally looking like they're not doing anything. A little bit more, it would clear any potential acid that might accumulate at the end of the workout. So that's, again, one of the things we talked about earlier on. We don't want acid to accumulate. The hill is going to take care of it. The rest is going to take care of it. If you were to go just to, say, 3 minutes and 1 second to get that 80%, you would eventually probably have accumulation of acid, and that's not what we want here. So make sure that you give a little bit more rest on these than you would for, basically twice as amount of rest as you would give on, say, the short hill intervals that we talked about in previous videos. Pick what makes sense for you and your kids. Adjust if it takes a little bit longer. So again, we said about 350 to 400 meters. You might have, a group of younger or less developed kids that can only get to 300 meters in that window that we talked about, and you don't want them to go out to 90. You just want them to go out to 60 seconds because you're just starting it. Perfectly fine. That makes perfect sense of taking the principles of the workout and making it work for your situation if you know that why. If you've got kids that can't do 350 meters or whatever your hill is in 90 seconds, make sure that you kind of cut it back, call 90 seconds or whatever, so that they know that it's time for them to stop. Again, especially for your less strong or less conditioned kids. I don't think you're going to have a problem, especially if you're looking at high school kids, with a up ramp, and most people getting to 400 meters in under 60 seconds. It's probably not going to happen. I suppose that would be something else that you might want to look at. But, again, just take all those things in mind in your situation and have it make sense for what you're doing. Just take those principles in mind as you're doing it about, the incline, the extent, the rest, what you're trying to get accomplished, and make it work for you. Okay, so you definitely want to periodize these hills as you're doing it, right? So actually, let me back it up here. So you've got the medium hill, you're at the very bottom, and you go, go, whatever, clap, and you go all the way up to the top. You're just going to jog back down. You're going to have to jog around. The nice thing about the place that we have this is there's a lot of sidewalk. There's actually sort of a little park that we park at that's right by this. So just make sure that you're moving, make sure that you're moving, make sure that you're moving. You can stop for a second to get water if you've left it at the bottom of the hill or whatever. Just make sure that you're constantly moving. The idea being is that acid is cleared more effectively with aerobic work. We've talked about in previous videos that the aerobic system, specifically the mitochondria and the membrane, uses the free hydrogen ions that comes from the anaerobic glycolytic system for its own fuel source. So the idea being is the easy work, not only does it help with aerobic development, linking these reps together, it's what's going to help clear the acid. So just kind of keep that in mind. You're going to go all the way up really, really fast. Maybe catch your breath for a second at the top of the hill. The way we have it, we kind of have to keep jogging over the top of it, because we have maybe the other people a little bit behind that are maybe not quite as quick at that point, and then we kind of jog back down and reform at the bottom. So that's kind of the way it looks in your head. And again, if you want to see what it looks like in practice, video in the description down below. You need to definitely periodize your hills. Makes perfect sense. We talked about periodizing, starting with your short hill intervals in general prep. Probably week 1 of general prep, you want to make sure you're doing short hills so that you have that idea. And we talked about having blocks. And what this is going to do, we said that you want to do about 4 to 5 weeks of the short hill intervals, and then go away from it from 2 blocks, and then you come back for a second block of short hill intervals. Well, really what you're going to do with your short hill intervals the second time, you're going to do it for 2 to 3 times, and then the second block of hills you're doing is you're going to start doing these medium hill intervals. So the second block of hills that ends general prep, that's where you're going to start replacing short hill intervals with medium hills. So starting 2 or so weeks to the end of general prep. Then, because this is your second block of hills that we talked about in that previous video on short hill intervals, you're also going to go away from hills for 2 weeks even as you start specific prep, okay? That's the best way to allow the adaptation. It's not just tagging hills all the time. It's 4 to 5 weeks, go away from 2 weeks, come back for 4 to 5 weeks, go away for 2 weeks, and then you're going to come back again, return for another 1 to 2 weeks of medium hills before you would start doing those long hills that we talked about, and we're going to have a video on in the future that helps link your specific prep to pre-competitive phase of your training year. So later in the microcycle, you're going to progress again to those long hill intervals as you add other training types and get into those really important meets of the season. So these hills, medium hills, are going to build on the strength that you developed in the short hill intervals, okay? But they have that different adaptation we talked about that are more race specific. That adaptation is starting to nudge along that anaerobic glycolytic system in a very safe and effective way to where you're still going to be peaking where you want to. So that's, again, why this sort of makes sense. If you didn't do the short hill intervals at the beginning of the season, these are going to be much more taxing, and you're probably going to get to a point where you can't do as many, and you might be accumulating acid. So again, the idea that you have to periodize your hills. Don't just start at one of these. Make sure that you've done everything in its proper place. Why you did the short hill intervals were important at that time of the year. Why you do the medium hills at this part of the year for the same reason. Okay, sequence these with, okay, when in the short hill intervals we talked about, you want to kind of move these workouts away from alactic workouts, okay, just to kind of spread them out, because alactic workouts and short hill intervals kind of work the same thing. Not that they train the same thing, but they work the same energy system. And we talk about in the video on rest and recovery that I'll put in the description down below, you want to train different energy systems on different days. What you want to think about with these is, again, try and have them at least, a couple days away from alactic workouts, at least a day in between. Don't want to do those back to back. And then as you get into specific prep, you want to have them away from intensive tempo workouts, okay? Because they're a similar effect. You're not going to be doing intensive tempo in general prep, so it's easier. You're just worrying about alactic workouts, the ones that are here at the end of general prep, but the ones that are here in specific prep for 1 to 2 weeks, intensive tempo is truly anaerobic glycolytic work, so you wouldn't want to do these because that's what you're also training. So just kind of keep those in mind. So these are somewhat high intensity, but there's no real waste product if you've done them correctly because of the incline and the rest. We talked about the extensive rest and the incline. Fatigue comes from using the creatine phosphate, as we said, 3 to 4 minutes, and that recharges. Muscles are going to be fatigued, obviously, the next day. But if you've done a lot of these, well, I'm getting ahead of myself here, so I won't go there. But the muscles are going to be fatigued, and there's going to be aerobic fatigue. But all those things are about 12 to 24 hours of recovery, okay? Again, going back to that story I mentioned about from our sprint coach, they used to do hills, probably not medium hill intervals, but the day before a meet. These are actually workouts because of the hill taking away the intensity, the acid accumulation, those type of things. You can come back and do anything the next day, okay? I like to sequence these also with long runs. I talked about in the short hill intervals. I like to kind of go long runs to something like this that tags those two specific faster type energy systems. You can do that very easily because of this window of recovery. This makes sequencing these workouts somewhat easy if you've done the short hill intervals. If you've not done the short hill intervals and you try and do this, you're going to wipe yourself or whoever you're training out for probably about 3 days, because it's just they don't have that adaptation that they should have been building from the short hill intervals, okay? So if you did the short hill intervals, say maybe 7 or so times, 6, 7, 8 times, depending how many you could get in during general prep, these should be, something you kind of just plug and play where it makes sense with everything that you're doing, okay? It can be a little bit tricky as you get into specific prep. Specific prep, you start to have meets kind of going on in there, as well as the new workout types like intensive tempo that we're going to talk about in some subsequent videos here when we start looking at just the workouts in specific prep. So the first 2 weeks you do them are going to be so easy to get in. They're just going to fall into your training plan. These 1 to 2 weeks here, this is where it gets a little bit trickier. This is why I settled on for the fictitious macrocycle we're going to look at in 1 second. Doing 3 because it makes sense, because as we then build into intensive tempo workouts, meets being played out, and then eventually long hill intervals that you need to get in also, it just becomes a little bit more challenging, but you can definitely make it into where you can get 3 to 5. So let's go ahead and see what it actually looks like on a fictitious macrocycle, looking at the end of general prep into specific prep as we look at an actual calendar and how these might line up. Okay, so this is the same fictitious macrocycle that we were dealing with when we were looking at general prep. You'll see right here, general prep this is the 10th and the 11th week. So as I said, you want to put your medium hill intervals here at the very, very end. Obviously, we don't have any more short hill intervals. You would not go back to short hill intervals once you've progressed to medium hills. If you've timed them correctly, there'd be no reason to. You did them in their proper place. So here we are. The first one that you might do is on August 3rd. If you're kind of dealing with, again, this is based on a state meet of November 7th, just what we have here in Florida. So that's what it's kind of going to. If yours is maybe a week later, you might start this a week later, or however you want to do it. Maybe you want to do it around that same time and get another medium hill interval in. You might have a 24-week macrocycle. The one that we're looking at here is 23 weeks. So all those things kind of play in, but this is about where you would want to do it. The 10th and the 11th week of general prep. Those last two times that you might be doing short hill intervals. So right in here, we talk about the idea of spacing it out from alactic. So we've got a day here in between. Maybe in a perfect world, you might have 2 days, but it's not too bad. You've got a long run right here in between, and we're going to come back to an alactic run before a tempo run, 45 minutes, and then VO2 max, the absolute top end that you would do with a high school kid, 4 times a mile. I'm sorry, this is a VO2 max test, not intervals. So the idea being here is that you've got all those different things we've talked about, your aerobic thresholds, your fly 30s, your tempo run, so your alactic work, your hills, your recovery runs, and your VO2 max test. You've got everything that you would normally get in general prep. The only thing that's different, you don't have short hill intervals, you have medium hill intervals. So we come here, we got our second one. As I mentioned, at least as things are right now, hopefully it stays this way. School for us is going to start on the 10th of August, so I'm not going to do anything different. We've already done medium hills once. First day of school, they had a great first day of school, and we're going to do some medium hills, 4 to 5 the first time, 5 to 6 the second time, 3 miles on the back end. Typically get to about 8 miles or so on those days. Alactic 2 days later, intervals here. I do kind of spread these out, especially from the VO2 max work the first time. As I said, it's 24-hour recovery, but I don't want to go crazy with it. You could do the VO2 max test right here if you wanted to. You could technically do it the day after. But I'm just, I want to space it out just a little bit, especially as they're probably getting a little bit antsy as school is starting and all that. Don't want to go too crazy with it. Then, specific prep. We talk about meets begin. Here would be our first meet of the regular season, Central Hillsborough meet. No hills for 2 weeks. We talked about go away from it for 2 weeks. So that's the same thing we're going to do here as we get into specific prep 1, specific prep 2, no hills, no hills. You'll see no medium hill intervals, so we'll go to September, which is the 3rd week of specific prep, the last 2 days of August, and then we'll go into September. You'll notice I don't have any other workouts in here, but we have a meet here, Sefner Christian Invitational on the 5th of September. We're going to put medium hill intervals right here. We're going to go out to 6 to 7, and we're going to keep 3 miles on the back end. Maybe it's more like 8.5 on this day because we've done a little bit more reps, but it's usually about an 8-mile day. And you can come back and do a really good race 2 days after because it's not the first time you've done it, it's the 3rd time you've done it. They should have really good performance in this race. This race that we're actually going to also has a lot of hills, so it's kind of specific for this one in particular. I don't necessarily do it that way, but it's nice when it works out. You would have 4 or 5 weeks here left of specific prep into pre-comp. As I said, you've got some meets kind of going on here. Excuse me. And this would be the last time you do it. I said 3 to 5. It's great if you can get more in, but we have to kind of transition to doing more intensive tempo. Eventually, at the end of this, some special endurance 1. And as I mentioned, long hill intervals. Sort of a hint to where it would happen. The first long hill interval that I would have on this fictitious macrocycle would be right here on Labor Day. We have to travel a little bit far in Tampa, Florida to get to any actual hills that you could do long hill intervals on. So I try and do it on days off from school. But again, just a little hint, the first long hill interval that we would do on this fictitious macrocycle would be right here on Labor Day, a day off from school. We can actually go out and travel to it. So before we finish up this discussion with the last slide here about what these workouts pair great with, again, as you can see, we didn't do a ton of these workouts, these medium hill intervals. Again, as we said, it's a bridge, it's a transition. You don't want to spend a ton of time in the bridge, it's getting you from one point to the other. So 3 in the macrocycle works great. If you can make it to where you can get 4 to 5 also, that's great too. But you've got other things that are more important. This just serves as sort of a jumping off point. And I think that kind of makes sense as you kind of look at it as you go from short hills to the intensive tempo, more glycolytic type work. And then eventually you're going to see how it kind of fits in with the long hills too. Make it work for your situation, but don't make these the end-all and be-all. These are a stepping stone, a bridge, a transition. Okay, so what does it pair great with? Because you want to see what kind of things you can add to it to make these work even better. We've already talked about this, long cooldowns. I love long cooldowns. They help get any acid out that might have been there, any waste products, and give you some extra central VO2 max development to make these an endurance day, as well as everything else we talked about with the motor performance abilities. Going about 3 miles at an easy pace, and 3 miles, that's for my top-end boys, my mid-tier boys, the girls that we train with. I usually say 25 minutes on the day I tell the boys to go 3 miles. Usually works out to about the same. At an easy pace, look at a heart rate of about 120 to 150. Don't worry about aerobic threshold pace on this. Your aerobic threshold is going to be probably too fast for this because you do those on days you're just doing aerobic threshold. Look for a heart rate of 120 to 150. And you're going to get some extra development, and you're going to clear any potential acid that may have started to show up there, especially at the end of this workout. It adds to the overall aerobic development. As I said, we typically get 7 to 8 miles on these days. That's a pretty good day in terms of overall volume. You don't want the volume to slip on these days, so that's an important quality to kind of get in there too. That is fine as long as it's on the back end. Don't try and do it where you go out and you do your long run and you try and do hills on the back end. They're not going to be fast enough. Don't do it that way. Do these in their proper order so that the hills can be relatively fast like you're looking for. So one of the things that you can also do, and it's not a requirement, it's to do what's called relaxation techniques. So after your cool down and your stretching, you find a place like a park bench or a fence or something like that, and you just prop your legs up where you're lying on your back, and your legs are propped up well above your heart for 5 to 10 minutes. Eyes closed. You're just relaxing. It's bringing the heart rate down. It's keeping the blood from pooling in your lower extremities. You know, it's not necessarily, you know, I would say it's really important on a tempo day or a VO2 max day or something like that, or especially a glycolytic specific day. Not super important on these days, but I find my group just really likes it on this day too, so I certainly let them do it, and it certainly can help speed up the process. So after your cool down, your long cool down, as we just talked about in your stretching routine, just 5 to 10 minutes, close out practice, just have everybody relax, eyes closed, and it'll help speed up the recovery process for the next day. What is also great is to pair this with a long run the next day or the day before. The two that we showed you, you can see, and then the one I didn't show you what was the day before it, is the idea of, you know, having it right after or right before. And really, I like doing the long run and then doing it if you can make it work out just a little bit. It's not the end of the world like the way that we showed it in the fictitious macro cycle that we were looking at. I think that if you go super long, low intensity, long run, and then come back with something shorter and faster like this, just kind of helps keep everything balanced and in check. But the really important thing is having them on opposite days or right next to each other, is it works complete opposite energy system, right? We're working the alactic and the glycolytic system. You're obviously working the aerobic system all the time, but coming back and just working the aerobic system and let the alactic and glycolytic system rest the next day or the day before because of the long run, it's a really important thing. So I like to try and have my long run very close to my hill runs if I can, as well as if I can make it close to my alactic runs. It's the same kind of idea. Why you would try and keep those close to each other, or at the very least maybe a recovery run. You can definitely do a tempo run if you want to, also for the same reason, but that's the idea, is let the other energy systems rest. Sequencing workouts isn't about easy day, hard day. It's about mixing energy, what energy systems you are stressing on that day. Again, a video in the description down below talks about rest, not only rest periods, but, you know, sequencing workouts and things like that. Might be interesting to take a look at if you haven't seen that one. Lifting. This is perfectly paired up with lifting. I have a video in the description down below on strength work that's important for distance runners. Hill work is all about power and force production. That's all related to lifting too, especially if you're doing it with these quick reps. In the description down below, I talk about general prep strength drills, and the third tier of that is talking about med ball work or weight room work, quick reps, fairly high rate, done very quickly, kind of thinking just like alactic work. Pairs perfectly with what you've done that day because it's the same basic thing. So it makes a lot of sense to do lifting on those days. And plyometric exercises, plyometric strength, we talk about that's one of the things that you're training with hills, so it makes sense to do some plyometric exercises on these days, especially longer plyometric work. I talk about, and I'll have it in the video description down below, talking about warm-up. I treat plyometrics as part of my extended warm-up on my alactic days and my hill run days. So you want to kind of do these bounding type circuits, and again, description down below if you want to take a look at it. Done before hills of this type of work. It's the same type of thing that you're doing for the central nervous system, muscle coordination, synchronization, and muscle elasticity. We are looking for on these days, so it just kind of primes in a little bit shorter, more explosive way. At the beginning, it allows maybe these reps to be a little bit more effective and just kind of continue what you're looking for on these days. It's the same type of bounding circuit that I have my group do before short hill intervals during the second short interval block. I don't do it during the first one in general prep. I definitely do plyometrics before alactic all year round. But I also definitely do them on the long hill interval days too. It's just sort of an extra thing to add to it to make sure you're getting the most out of your days. A lot of our days as distance runners are based on, long continuous type work or intervals at aerobic type work where you wouldn't want to do things like this, things like your plyometrics, your lifting days, that what I call tier 3 of strength if you've watched that video description. So when you can get these in and it makes sense and it helps the development, use it. Don't plan your days around it, but when you've got a hill run like this, get it in. It definitely can help you as you're doing it. So I hope you like this video on this transition workout, medium hills. Again, I'll talk about long hill intervals, and I'll do a whole video, I think, just on the progression of hills throughout the year. But I'm also going to, in the next little bit, start looking at some the specific prep, the actual specific prep workouts, not these ones that just link them together, but your extensive tempo, intensive tempo, special endurance 1, special endurance 2, the things you're adding to the party with specific prep, and also this idea of where you can sequence these in with everything else that we've been doing in general prep that we're keeping, how we can sequence all these things together for the most success in specific prep as you go into pre-comp of your training year. So if you like this video, please think about liking or subscribing. If you did find this helpful, maybe share it around to other people. I do about 3 to 5 videos a week on different aspects of running, cross country, track and field, all those different things. So if you're a running enthusiast, track and field enthusiast, please hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. It definitely helps the channel to grow and evolve. And if you have any questions, I love the fact we've been getting so many great questions and comments in the descriptions over the last maybe about month or so. Love answering those. So if you have a question or a comment, please put those in the comments down below. And until next time, this has been Coachy TV.